Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Today with us, we have KSM Transport Advisors, David Roush, President, and Chris Henry, Chief Operating Officer of Canada. Gentlemen, welcome to the Hot Seat.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, Spencer, thank you for having us.
Well, guys, we're going to heat things up here in a minute, but just why don't each of you just take 15, 20 seconds, tell us about the work that you're doing at KSM Transport Advisors.
Sure, I'll kick it off. So, Spencer, KSM Transport Advisors, or KSMTA, we're an advisory firm that specifically serves the transportation industry, and we focus primarily on the truckload asset-based carriers within that industry. And honestly, what we do is help them improve profitability. I don't want to sound shallow that we only care about money, but that's what we help them do, is make more money.
That's about as clear as you can get right there. Chris, what can we add to that?
Yeah, so I'm the rookie on the team. So I just joined KSMTA in January of this year, and I'm just looking forward to help spread the gospel of freight math and increasing yield for our customers.
The Gospel of Freight Math. That might be the headline for this event today. So we're going to build on that and jump right in. So where our worlds intersect in terms of M&A and what you guys do, a large part of that is in operational diligence. So Chris, let me just start with you. Tell us what that is. What is operational diligence and what role does it play within the M&A process?
My answer is going to be influenced by what we do internally, because operational due diligence can get into a lot of things, including HR issues and that kind of stuff. But really, the core of our business focuses on math and applying math and the tribal knowledge that our team has in the trucking industry. But basically, what we're doing is we're looking at the networks of the buyer and the seller and seeing if there's any cohesion there, any accretive value there. So we're not focusing on the costs and economies of scale and synergies and all those other buzzwords. We're focusing on this historical data for over long and short periods of time to see if there's any complements to those two networks. So that's, from our perspective, where we start with.
So before we move on to that, what are some of the common places where you're actually seeing the math of that analysis stand out, and what is typically overlooked as part of a diligence process?
Yeah, I'll let David talk to that. He has all the anecdotes.
Lots of stories. But really, when a truckload carrier is buying another truckload carrier, a lot of what they're buying is the margin that's generated by the freight that the target company hauls. And a lot of carriers don't really understand the math behind what the freight is. So what we do is we analyze using our proprietary technologies. We analyze the acquiring company's freight network, and then we lay on top of that freight network the acquisition target's freight network, and we analyze what's good, bad, ugly, and are able to calculate what we call an accretive value of the freight that's being purchased by the acquiring company. So they know going in what the issues, what the challenges are, what moves they need to make. They're not buying a freight based on, like in the old days when we bought companies. You look, oh yeah, Procter & Gamble, Fortune 500 company, that's great. We need to add them to our roster. Well, who knows if their freight is good and really works, within the terms of your freight network.
No, I think that's pretty fascinating. So, I mean, you've been on in both roles as a buyer, and now you're in this role, helping other buyers kind of navigate through this process. What happens? What do you see from the buyer's kind of psyche of the overall deal itself, having this information in hand? How does it help them navigate the rest of the deal?
I think it's empowering because, you're buying the freight and you're also buying the drivers. We also overlay the drivers where they live onto the freight networks to see where the outliers are, what drivers, make sense for the freight network, what drivers don't make sense for the freight network. So, knowledge is power. And, we've actually had people where we've overlaid the networks and they've been, pretty far into a deal and they've backed out of the deal. So you may not want to publish this hot seat because I mean, but
Stop it right
but
there. Stop it right there.
but I mean, it's true. I mean, it's just you're buying freight. I mean, you're buying a lot of different things. You're buying capacity. You're buying all this, but you make your money from hauling freight.
I was just going to say, in absence of acquiring another company, just the analysis on its own is pretty insightful because it's pretty often where we present our analysis or one of our freight network engineers present their analysis, and the owners, the VP of operations, the customer service people are like, oh, I didn't know we did that, or when did we and why did we do that? So just on its own, it's insightful. So overlaying another network to that, it just amplifies things.
We just came back from doing a seminar with the International Milk Haulers Association, and we were talking about the 9 differentiators that separate acquisitions and losers. And the number one is to basically count the cost. And really what we're trying to do is just like what you're talking about. If you're having an analysis like this on the front end, what it really does is help refine the profile of what you should be looking at. And so, like from a deal sourcing standpoint, I mean, from my vantage point, it seems like this could really streamline what's going to be accretive and where you should be spending your attention in terms of developing the relationships and outreach. Is that accurate?
Sure. I mean, I mean, it's something, and of course, we sell this service, but I think a carrier that's looking to sell, somebody who's looking to sell their carrier, they should know this stuff. I mean, it should be a part of the package.
So let's talk about that, because when we get into due diligence, in my world, this is where people start getting serious about spending money around the deal as part of the diligence. And this is where like people get pretty sensitive. The logic really is like if you're going to kill a deal, you want to kill it as quickly as possible. If you know it's not going to make it to the finish line. So where do you see folks that when are you getting invited into the conversation? When are they wanting to know this information as part of that diligence process?
So let me give you an anecdote here. We have a carrier that was purchased by private equity. The private equity came to us. This was 3 years ago. They came to us and talked about what we're doing. And because it was all this math and all these numbers, the private equity guys got really excited about it, was because they could get something they could really get their hands around. And we did a pre-acquisition diligence for them that turned out really well. It was a refrigerated carrier that they were purchasing. They are on the cusp of purchasing another carrier, and our contact at the private equity reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've got this deal teed up. We're about ready to get serious about it. We want you to be the first diligence project that we do, because we want to know right away before we do anything else and spend anything else if it's really going to fit for us."
That's really interesting. What do you find, like how receptive are the sellers and their, if they have representation, how receptive are they to providing that documentation for the analysis that early in the process?
You do deals all the time, so that those are their closest guarded secrets. The equity guy I just mentioned, I mean, his feeling is, and he's talked to them about this throughout his negotiations with them, or pre-negotiations with them. He's talked about wanting to do this, and that it's a way that they do business, and that the equity company does business. And if the target company doesn't want to do it, then they're not going to play.
Would it be fair to say that as part of their communication strategy, they're saying like, hey, this is the ABCs of working with us, and if that doesn't work, we'll just move on to the next person?
Exactly.
Yeah, and on the flip side too, from the seller's point of view, heading that conversation off at the pass is, we think, a good step to say, here's where we think there's value to a potential buyer if they fit this model. Here are the advantages of our network. Here's the discipline that we incorporate into what we do, and hopefully that goes through the entire company. So both sides, we think, can benefit from this process.
Maybe can you provide an example? Like in about a time where a seller had the information and they were able to leverage that to their advantage as part of matching up with the right buyer.
we've had a couple of our clients who have been sold, and they've used that as part of their process. Frankly, we weren't involved in that because they already had the information. So I'm not sure I've got a great example of that for you, Spencer.
Yeah, I think because I could see how it could be helpful, but also if it's communicating, it might turn the some buyers that might be interested in it away, one way or the other. But I guess it just kind of depends on the timing of that sharing of information.
It's also kind of like, maybe a good analogy is to the outward facing cameras that trucks have. You have a incident, and you know if you're guilty or not right away. So you either pay up and move on, or you fight it to death. And so, I mean, that's something with the freight network, is that you know right away what you've got.
And I think that in David, you and I have talked about this on a deal not long ago, just trying to figure out, okay, hey, where do we see? Because when we're trying to sell companies, oftentimes like the imperfections are what gets it done. Like that's where we're able to kind of market the synergy and the upside. And back to the knowledge is power program, I see that all the time. I think that there's tremendous value, whether you use it directly or whether you share it. Just the knowledge of it is empowering.
When I said I have no great knowledge about how our carriers that were sold, how they used it, I mean, I do know how they used it. I mean, they presented our reporting to the acquiring company and said, here's what we do. Here's where we see some issues. Here's what the upside is, because we calculate on an ongoing basis, what the upside potential, we call it an expected benefit. I mean, here's the things that we can fix together. We haven't been able to fix all these things by ourselves, but with you coming in, we can fix it together. And it's really similar to a lot of our clients will take our information to their customers and show them, okay, this is why this works for me, and this is why this doesn't work for me. And it's just freight math. I mean, at that point, you're talking about math. You're not talking about whining because of whatever. I mean, you're talking about facts, and that's a lot easier discussion to have.
Yeah, and as a byproduct, you expand the population of potential buyers too, because you distill it down to math. The common language that both trucking operators, as good trucking operators, as well as financial buyers can operate from. That we think as a byproduct, it expands that. So.
I think for the folks that maybe are not directly in our industry, they may not have an appreciation for how sophisticated some of the math is around trucking. Could you share just some of the metrics that as part of this, like what are we looking at? What are some of the data points that are at the front of the conversation as we're looking at this diligence process?
So we're really looking at the business from a marketing standpoint. There's been forever, all these metrics, rate per mile, revenue per day, per month, per hour, per minute. We focus on margin, that revenues, the driving for show, the margins, the putting for dough. So we're looking on how much margin are you making in a given time period. We currently look at it on margin per day. We're moving that to margin per hour. But the real key is we're looking at a metric that's called yield, which is not just how much am I making on a one-way trip. Like you go to Florida from anywhere, you're going to get a very high rate. But when you get to Florida, you're going to have not a lot to haul, because there's people down there that consume lots of product, but they don't make a whole lot in Florida. So how does that fit together? That's that magic yield metric.
And our process, for a lot of people who are unfamiliar with it, is very analogous to a money ball. So the money ball concept is essentially doing more with less on paper. So how that all those different components, the network, your customers, your drivers, fit into making you better than what they would be on their own. So, the analogy would be your XYZ trucking company with 150 trucks. How can I compete with Knight, who's like the New York Yankees and we're the Oakland A's? So how can we put all these pieces together to get better yield, better margin out of the network than, those Yankees?
Those Yankees.
Yeah, you can see we just Chris is Brad Pitt. I'm Jonah Hill.
Yeah, no. We're both Jonah.
Um,
We need to find a Brad Pitt.
that's hilarious. So when we come back to the diligence side on the M&A, walk me through a conversation. You've just done the analysis. You're sitting down with the buyer that has a desire. How are you scoring the diligence? What does the conversation look like at that point?
I mean, we have like I said, this one page that we call an expected benefit that shows if you engage in freight network engineering seriously over a year's time period, how much money can you make through arbitrage, through stop doing the really fixing or stopping doing the really bad things, getting more of the good things, adjusting your pricing where you have the opportunity to adjust your pricing, and also looking finally at the flows of what areas are you going to, what type of deadheads do you have in and out of those areas, what margins are you getting into those areas, what margins are you getting out of those areas. So we start with the expected benefit, and typically there's 7 to 12 cents per total mile that we see that's real. We see 30 or 40 cents, but we discount that back to 7 to 12 cents per total mile. Um, and then we have a document that's a PowerPoint that's typically 70 to 100 pages long that goes into very granular detail and shows what makes up that money that's on the table there.
Oh, I like that. So one thing that's interesting to me, like so much about getting deals done, has to do with getting compatible cultures together. So what about the diligence process on the ops that we're talking about? What lends into the culture of the potential acquisition target does it offer, if any, to the buyer?
Well, just from a newbie perspective, what I've observed is it's very telling in terms of the analysis where they're at in terms of operational discipline. So, in general, if a company is disciplined, and there are exceptions to that, obviously, but if they're disciplined, they're going to be sussed out in the numbers that we see. So, higher yield, better density in their lanes. But in general, their culture will be tighter. They'll have accountability. They'll have good hierarchy and structure, and they'll be doing similar things in maintenance in terms of discipline and operational effectiveness. Their teams are going to know what they need to know. They're going to execute towards any plans that they've put in place. They'll have plans in place. They'll have some form of a strategic plan in place. So it all kind of flows together. So we think in the parallel measurement to a higher yield for a company is kind of a discipline score. So the more disciplined they are, they're going to end up having a higher yield. So they work together.
And just adding on to that, after looking at literally hundreds of companies' data sets and the information, the accounting information that they provide, so we get data from their TMS, we get financial information from their accounting system, and we can honestly tell if they're a well-run company just based on the quality of those two things. I mean, the data that we're getting, what the data model is, how do they just like automatically um, go arrive and depart from a shipper at the same time? We measure the percentage that they're arriving and departing at the shipper, what the time period is. And so some carriers, it's like arrive and depart, 85% of the time is 0 minutes, 0 seconds. So that the dispatcher is just hitting a button, and they're not very disciplined.
I think that's fascinating. I've got one more question and then a little bit of a wild card for you. So the question that I have is, and you all have seen this kind of explosion of first-time acquirers out in the market right now. And so some have been 60 years established, wonderful companies, but have never used acquisitions as an instrument for growth. So from your vantage point, what advice would you give to those that are kind of venturing out into doing a deal with very limited experience? What advice would you give them as far as getting on a path to be a successful acquirer?
So I just actually gave this advice to one of our clients who has about 120 trucks, very focused geographic operation. And the first advice I gave him was to make sure that he has really good advisors, to make sure that he has people that are going to tell him the truth and be able to guide him, because he has no idea what he's really doing. He just knows that he wants to grow. Um, the other advice that I gave him was not to grow too quickly, to try something small to begin with, that you can manage, so you're not betting the farm on doing an acquisition. And the third thing is to, look at their financials, pull their financials apart, look at their freight network, pull their freight network apart, just really do the diligence to make sure that you know what you're getting. And he was too small to, have a banker represent him or something. I mean, it would have been a smaller deal, but I think you just got to know your stuff. I mean, and you got to have people that can help you understand that stuff. I mean, if you're buying a company, you got to spend the money on the advisors to help you, make sure you really know what you're getting.
Yeah, it's funny. We'll often say, yeah, I told you about the seminar we recently did, and my joke of saying was, the nine differentiators are summed up into one thing: don't overpay. The end. And so, and so,
Yeah.
so but you can't get there without diligence. You're never going to understand it as far as what you're really getting into without proper diligence. So I have a question now, David. I know that you spent some time in Wyoming. Is that correct? So my family and I were going out to Wyoming this summer, and Chris, you can chime here too if you're familiar with the area. But I'm looking for three excursions that you think that we should consider in the Wyoming, Yellowstone, Jackson Hole area while we're there.
So one would be to hire a guide. I would use the lodge at Palisades Creek in Swan Valley, Idaho, and go fishing for a day on the South Fork River. That's beautiful. A second one is I would ride the tram up to the top and hike down at the village, the ski village in Jackson Hole. And the third thing, when I was in Yellowstone, is I can send you a map of some roads that are off the path, that are, gravel roads that most people don't go down, that you can go on and see some cool stuff that you wouldn't normally see if you're just a tourist driving down the paved roads.
Well, I will take you up on all three of those, sir, and also take you up on the opportunity to do business together. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. For those that you're watching, this is a tremendous value in terms of, like I said, empowering with data. Thank you for what you guys are doing, how you are growing our industry and helping us to provide better services. That's going to do it for us in the hot seat. We will see you guys next time.